Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Wherever you may be in Europe this morning, welcome. My name is Paul Bevan. I'm the Research Director at Bloor Research for IT Infrastructure, and I'm joined today on this call by Sean O'Donnell, who's the Managing Director of EMEA for Virtual Instruments. And we're going to be looking at this whole issue of infrastructure performance management and how you get towards performance SLAs. Over the course of the next 30 minutes or so, what are we going to be talking about? Well, we'll literally frame the argument, I think, to start with, let you know why we at Bloor think it's important, why you should care about this, and what you can do about it. And then I'm going to pass over to Sean for Virtual Instruments to have a look at how they address some of the issues and challenges we'll see in this around application-centric infrastructure management. I'll come back at the end, peer a little bit into the future about what's next, and give everybody a chance then to finish up with some questions. So let's get going. In an increasingly software-oriented, virtualized, and cloud world, there's a danger that people forget that somewhere real data is moving off real disk drives, down real wires, to real switches and computers in noisy air-conditioned concrete buildings. Here, performance matters. If you then realize that much of this physical infrastructure exists in silos, either as a result of different technologies or different operational groups, and is usually being monitored and managed by different, often vendor-oriented point solutions, the challenge of getting a single view of how your IT infrastructure is performing is significant. The business needs to understand the risks posed by problems with IT infrastructure. When we talk about IT infrastructure risk, we often think in terms of availability and uptime. In reality, performance affects infrastructure risk as much as availability. So what we will discuss over the next 30 minutes is how you need to view infrastructure performance from the perspective of its impact on applications. In other words, infrastructure performance management that is application-centric. So why is this important? Well, in a sentence, there's a lot more to go wrong these days. Or put another way, there are a lot more options and components you need to manage to ensure optimum performance. If you just look at data center architectures, they're becoming far more complex. You've got new mesh type architectures, older client server, and in many cases still mainframe architectures floating around. There are lots of different connectivity issues within the data center itself, whether it's Ethernet or fiber, or as we're seeing now coming along, things like photonic switching. Your storage infrastructure will also be much more complex these days, depending on whether your requirements are for relational databases, object storage, block and file, etc. So there'll be network attached, storage area networks, flash arrays, etc. The infrastructure is becoming increasingly virtualized, and that brings with it a series of challenges around both management and performance of those virtual machines and those environments. And of course now, the added choice, I won't say complexity, but the added choice of containers and what that means. And clearly this all sits within an environment of cloud where some of this may be in your own data centers, but quite often if you're using a hybrid or public environment, the actual infrastructure that you want to perform will be sitting out in somebody else's data center. And increasingly trying to get assurance about performance from SLAs from your cloud service providers will be a concern for you. So why should you care? Well, we're coming to rely on IT more and more. IT infrastructure availability has been a board risk assurance item for some time. It's our contention at Bloor that as more and more IT systems are customer focused, and we move into a new industrial revolution of infrastructure, Internet of Things, machine learning, augmented intelligence, which you'll now sometimes hear called Industry 4.0. Infrastructure performance should be a board level assurance focus as well as an availability focus. This isn't about the infrastructure per se. It really is a business issue. So in the financial services sector, we've seen in the past that even the smallest latency issues can have cause huge volatility in the markets, leading to losses and gains running into the millions, so putting real risk there. If you're a retailer, if you're an online retailer, poor web load times can have a significant impact on business for you. And a recent Gomez research study for Akamai showed that even a 1-second delay in page response times can lead to as much as a 7% reduction in conversion rates. So this is about real business issues here, real top line, bottom line issues. And it's not just financial services and retail. There are many, many other industries who are affected by this sort of thing, whether you are in online gaming, multi-user online gaming, whether you're in ads serving, or increasingly anywhere where customer experience over the internet is an issue for you. Performance of your infrastructure is going to be a critical business issue. So what can you do about it? What do we think you need to be looking at? An essential element of this is understanding and being able to describe what data is needed to manage infrastructure performance. Put simply, you need to understand and own the performance metadata. On top of that, then, you're going to need solutions that have some common characteristics. For example, they need to be able to identify where the problem seen by the business is happening in real time, or be able to talk to specialized low-level application performance management and network performance management tools that can. So they must have well-defined, well-documented APIs for tool integration, even if they do a good job of reporting technical performance issues in business terms themselves. So this idea that you're going to have a range of tools coming along in the future, you're going to need to have open APIs. They must operate across technology and organizational boundaries and be vendor independent. That's quite important. They should be able to use, for example, monitoring information from a cloud service provider. But they should also be able to collect this at a more granular vendor independent level, perhaps by monitoring actual packet headers. They must not impose a significant overhead on the system. This usually requires that an agentless option should be available with out-of-band reporting. What that means is that management communication of performance issues doesn't use bandwidth that's being used for business communication. A hardware or appliance implementation should be available, although agents, in-band alerts, and software implementations all have a place too. Here, customer choice and flexibility is key. Then you need to provide business level dashboard with traffic lights. So basically what you're trying to do is ensure that you've got a dashboard that business management can understand, it can drill into and have meaningful business oriented SLAs in there. So that they understand. It's no good having performance SLAs that are all about IT infrastructure that the business doesn't understand. You absolutely need to get business involved with that, with things that they understand. Then you need to assure yourself about the tools your cloud service provider is using. Even if the enterprise can't see what's going on inside the CSP, you should be able to assure yourself about the tools that they're using to get real-time visibility itself. And you also, in this environment, need to think about owning the performance metadata as well as the data associated with their use of the service. The point is that we need to use end-to-end solutions across technology boundaries. These need to be firmly rooted in business impact, user experience management, and business terminology. And at this point, I think it'd be good to pass over to Sean from Virtual Instruments and let him explain how Virtual Instruments solutions start to address some of these issues that we've been identifying. Sean, let me pass over to you.
Thank you, Paul. So great introduction there, and thanks very much. A couple of points that I picked up on there. So first of all, I'm sure we'll all agree that IT infrastructure performance is absolutely a business issue. I found it quite interesting, your stat that 1 second delay in page response can lead to a 7% reduction in conversion rates in the retail environment. And we see those type of challenges in other environments as well. When we talk to customers, we very often ask the question, how does a slowdown in application performance affect your business? And very often they're able to give us metrics around that. But more importantly, what we really need to understand is, how do we help mitigate against those performance issues that are potentially going to impact business critical applications. So next slide, please, Paul. Thank you. So here at Virtual Instruments, we talk about what we call application-centric infrastructure performance management. What does that actually mean? Well, essentially what it means is that through our ability to monitor and test your underlying IT infrastructure, we enable customers to assure the performance and availability of their most mission critical applications. We give our customers a real-time view of the health, the performance, and the utilization of that underlying infrastructure. But we give that health, performance, and utilization information in the context of those mission critical business applications that are being supported by that infrastructure. Those applications that are either generating significant revenues for a company or an organization, or indeed those applications that a business can't really do without. For example, in a manufacturing system or in a manufacturer, a very, very large SAP system that's running the whole of the manufacturing, invoicing, ordering, dispatch systems, etc., etc. Next slide, please. So this follows on from what Paul was talking about earlier. And can you just click through as well, please, Paul? Just one more click. Thank you. We see the modern hybrid data center is becoming increasingly complex. The ability to understand all of the applications, the infrastructure components, and the interrelationships between them is really becoming beyond human comprehension. In larger environments where virtual instruments is typically deployed, there are thousands of infrastructure services in use, with virtualization at practically every tier within that environment. Next slide, please. And of course, that complex infrastructure is going to be supporting thousands of application services across a wide variety of vendors. To address this complexity, typically dozens of tools for both managing and monitoring the environment are deployed today. The biggest challenge, for the most part, is that these tools don't actually talk to each other. Then on top of that, to make matters worse, virtualization is pretty much everywhere. And whilst virtualization obviously offers significant benefits to organizations, virtualization also obscures performance visibility, as multiple constantly changing applications are frequently contending for the same infrastructure resource. This is what we call a noisy neighbor phenomenon. And that noisy neighbor typically results in business impacting performance bottlenecks, and in some cases even outages. Existing legacy monitoring tools really only provide keyhole views into components of the infrastructure. And as I mentioned before, the data is not correlated between them. And this leads to that ever-present finger pointing and war room scenario that I'm sure a number of you on the call are familiar with. We believe what is actually needed here is a vendor agnostic, full stack monitoring platform that sees in real time the entire infrastructure, from the VM right down through to the storage that supports the myriad of applications that are deployed within the modern data center. Next slide, please. So we've mentioned that the environment's very, very complex. So in such a complex environment, real-time automation is really the key to assuring performance and proactively maximizing the utilization of all of the resources. Change management systems like ServiceNow and orchestration systems generally work pretty well, but the automation loop with monitoring and analytics tools is broken, as the various tools don't talk to each other. And they also lack a common context to share actionable information. APM tools provide a view into how the application is behaving, but are typically blind to the infrastructure below the VM layer. Analytics tools like Splunk, for example, capture indexes and logs. They'll correlate captured data in a searchable repository, and you can generate reports and dashboards and alerts. But these ITOA tools like Splunk typically have limited real-time capability and limited domain expertise to help with proactive problem resolution and comprehensive infrastructure optimization. Next slide. So we believe that modern hybrid data centers require a new level of wisdom in order to assure performance and automate change. The solution for extreme predictability and application to infrastructure harmony is to really adopt tools that will capture the entire IO stack from the application, and that will come from the APM tools, the network, which will come from NPM tools, and importantly, from a virtual instruments perspective, the underlying multi-vendor infrastructure that services those applications. And that is application-centric infrastructure performance management. This is where virtual instruments comes in. Organizations that adopt hybrid infrastructures will optimize costs and increase efficiency. However, that also increases the complexity of selecting the right tool set to deliver the end-to-end service assurance that you actually need in a multi-sourced environment. And research shows that by 2020, 90% of organizations will adopt hybrid infrastructure management capabilities, because hybrid infrastructure management capabilities is really what you need within this hybrid data center. Next slide, please. So how do you get complete end-to-end performance assurance? We believe it's a combination of things. We believe it's a combination of APM and application-centric IPM. The APM solutions are designed to monitor application behavior, and they really provide visibility from the end user to the VMs on servers. Typically, APM solutions are deployed on maybe 10 to 15% of applications within an environment. And that's normally due to cost, development overhead, plus the need to deploy agents. Application-centric IPM really picks up where APM leaves off. Application-centric IPM will monitor VMs, hosts, HBAs, network switches, storage arrays, and we sometimes refer to this as the north-south axis within the data center. App-centric IPM solutions will use real-time data. They'll correlate that data, and they'll use rich machine learning-based analytics to help identify and resolve problems across the entire infrastructure that supports all of the business applications. The combination of APM and IPM provide that complete end-to-end performance assurance. Next slide, please. So, and just build this out, Paul, thank you. And some more. Thank you. So, application-centric IPM, we believe that's a better approach, and that's an approach that we here at Virtual Instruments are pioneering. To be truly application-centric, a monitoring platform must, first of all, know where the applications live on the infrastructure. And we must know that at all times. We must also know the relative business value or service level agreement tier of each application. We must be able to see how those applications are behaving or indeed stressing the infrastructure at any point in time. And application-centric IPM must provide real-time end-to-end infrastructure visibility. We need to be able to offer that self-learning based analytics and provide meaningful dashboards and reports that can be used by everyone in the business, from the executive to the line of business owner, to the application owner, to the operations team, to the infrastructure owners. And finally, we believe that you must, any application-centric infrastructure performance monitoring or management solution must be well integrated with other common data center management and automation tools, such as the APM, such as the IT service management solution, IT operations analytics, and of course the various device-specific tools from any of the component vendors. And this is really, what we mean by application-centric IPM. Next slide, please. So just to give you a flavor of Virtual Wisdom, the architecture, and how this really looks in practice. So Virtual Wisdom is built from the ground up, and the focus is really on helping your applications and infrastructure perform optimally together in conjunction with all of your other key management tools. Starting from the bottom, Virtual Wisdom will collect both machine data or indeed API data and wire data across the data center. We collect thousands of metrics every second. That wire and machine data collection layer will then feed that data into our workload intelligence platform. That workload intelligence platform will also discover where the applications live and will map the infrastructure topology associated with each application. Together, they enable intelligent correlation of data, which works in conjunction with the machine learning-based analytics to help you assure application performance, optimize your workloads, and also optimize the way in which you use capacity. It helps us, or helps you, identify the root cause of problems, and more importantly, prevent those problems from affecting or impacting your end users. So Virtual Wisdom is really the industry's first true infrastructure performance monitoring solution that delivers comprehensive real-time visibility into your multi-vendor infrastructure that supports your critical apps. It's a platform that understands how the infrastructure is performing for all of your critical applications. It knows which application services are running on which infrastructure components, as well as the relative importance of each application and how those dynamic applications are actually stressing the infrastructure. So with the app-centric approach to infrastructure performance management, you will essentially be able to proactively assure the performance of your key applications, manage those applications by service level tier, and also by importance to the business. You will avoid performance issues by continually optimizing capacity to meet the needs of the application workloads, and you will be able to resolve problems faster through those machine-based or machine learning-based analytics that identify and recommend solutions. So Paul, back over to you.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, very interesting. And I think everybody can probably see that Virtual Instruments, the Virtual Wisdom solution set there is going to be a key component in providing application-centric infrastructure performance management. Clearly, it meets most, if not all, of the requirements we see for this sort of holistic end-to-end approach, and we wish you success in that. So what's next from our perspective? Well, just sort of peeking forward, what we're seeing, the hyperscale operators, people like AWS, Google, Microsoft Azure, etc., have dramatically lowered the cost of building and operating IT infrastructure. Much of this has been made possible by the growth in software-defined solutions, which we at Law call big software. vendors of specific proprietary appliances, such as load balancers, for example, need to be aware that the direction of travel is for the use more and more of standard hardware as opposed to proprietary hardware, and greater use of software-defined solutions. Really, this is a world where software is beginning to eat the hardware, very much so. I mentioned OCP, which is the Open Compute Project. That's something I think people need to keep their eyes on. As more vendors get on board with OCP and as the technology developments feed down from the hyperscalers and telco operators who use it currently, they will become relevant and important for enterprises looking to drive consistent performance at a significantly lower cost. Given the use of multiple cloud providers by enterprises, and then the marked reluctance of those CSPs to provide performance SLAs, we see an opportunity for resellers, MSPs, and CSPs to act as cloud brokers, and as part of that role, provide a single view of performance across multiple clouds. At the end of the day, we live in an online, real-time world with little patience for poor IT performance. Tools like those you've heard about today from Virtual Instruments will be critical in giving you a vendor-agnostic view of your whole infrastructure, and importantly, the ability to provide meaningful, business-oriented performance SLAs moving forward. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. Now, hopefully, we've got some time for questions, and we have Chris James from Virtual Instruments, who's been sort of monitoring the question situation. So Chris, have we got any questions that that Sean and I can address?
Yep. So there's a couple of questions from the floor. So one is probably to Sean, is that we already have monitoring tools. How is Virtual Wisdom different, and does it replace what I've currently got?
Okay, so Virtual Wisdom follows the track of an application top to bottom of the data center, and that's really what we, I suppose, call application-centric. So Virtual Wisdom gives you a single view of the whole data center rather than having to compile a report from different sources. We're also completely vendor neutral, so we can see the whole data center and not just elements of that data center. So the answer is, in some cases, we will absolutely complement some of the tools that are already in place, and indeed we can ingest and consume some of the data from those existing tools. But in many cases, indeed none of those tools, those what I would say point tools, vendor tools, will have a complete end-to-end view of the underlying infrastructure that supports those mission-critical apps. So the answer is we can replace some. It would depend on a customer-by-customer basis, Chris.
Okay, thank you. One here for Paul. Is performance testing the same as performance monitoring?
Well, performance testing is really the difference between the two. Performance testing lives in the lab, obviously. It's about trying to simulate loads that you expect to see in your infrastructure. And the challenge with that, as much as anything else, is I think we all know that in the real world, however much simulation you do beforehand, actually what happens in the real world is going to be slightly different. And the challenge with testing is to get this sort of infrastructure exactly the same as the one you're going to use in a live environment, which is difficult and costly. So while the testing and simulation tools are great, there is a challenge that when you get out into the real world, something different will happen. Therefore, I always suggest you should be testing, but you can't sort of rely on the test when it comes to the real world. You need to have those real world monitoring tools as well. So that's the fundamental difference. Is one lives in the real world, the other lives in the lab.
Good answer, thank you. One more here for Sean, very quick one. Is there a professional services option for Virtual Wisdom?
Yes, absolutely. So there are a number of different ways in which a prospective customer can consume Virtual Wisdom. So firstly, Virtual Wisdom can be consumed or purchased as a solution or a platform that you would deploy within your environment. Can also be provided as a managed service. But we do, yes, indeed, have a professional services option. We call that an infrastructure performance audit, otherwise abbreviated to an IPA. So essentially, what we do with an IPA is we bring in the easiest way to describe, I suppose, is we temporarily deploy a virtual wisdom platform within a customer environment. We gather a rich set of metrics from that environment over a period of typically 2 weeks. What we will then do is provide a level of analysis on that, provide a report back to the end customer, which will really look at 3 main areas, 3 main pillars, that of availability, performance, and optimization. And as part of the professional services deliverable, the report that we provide back will make recommendations on how to improve availability, how to improve performance, and indeed how to optimize the environment. Many customers look at using an IPA when they are having performance challenges or performance issues within an environment that are very, very difficult to identify. Typically, you will have either you may have had a war room scenario, or you may have involved a vendor. There may be a lot of finger pointing going on where perhaps the storage vendor is blaming the fabric vendors blaming the compute or virtualization vendor, and nobody can actually get to the root cause of an issue. In those scenarios, I would like to say that Virtual Instruments has actually never failed to identify the issue and provide recommendations around how you resolve them.
I once heard that termed finding the shortest mean time to proving innocence, I think, Sean.
Yeah, MTTI, absolutely. That's a great term. A customer came up with that many years ago. He said, MTTI, I said, mean time to identify. He said, no, mean time to innocence. How long does it take to prove? It's not my problem.
Yeah.
Fantastic metric.
Okay, one more quick one. Is it able to drill down into a Windows Hyper-V environment, or is it only able to drill down into VMware?
Absolutely. So we have support for ESX, Hyper-V, and also for AIX. So we are, as I say, vendor agnostic, and we cover the 3 primary hypervisor virtualization vendors.
Good. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time now. I wonder whether, Paul, you'd just like to wrap up by mentioning about the white paper, the Bloor Spotlight that is downloadable from both the Bloor and the Virtual Instruments websites.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody for taking part. Yes, if you want to find out some more, then as Chris said, we've written a white paper on this question of instrumenting the data center, the virtualized data center for performance SLAs, which you can find at our site at www.bloor.eu, but again at Virtual Instruments, which I think Chris is virtualinstruments.com, if it's fairly simple and straightforward. But have a look at that, download that, and that'll give you more details on our feelings and what we're seeing across the market for infrastructure performance management and its importance. So perhaps with that, I'd say thanks to Chris and to Sean from Virtual Instruments. Thank you to everybody else for taking part. Hope you found that useful, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the near future. Thank you and good morning.